Professor Velterra walked into the massive lecture hall at the Galactic Academic Institute, her four purple arms moving smoothly as she prepared for another day of teaching. The huge room buzzed with excited chatter from students who had traveled from every corner of the galaxy to study here. This wasn't just any ordinary university. This was the most prestigious learning center in known space, where the brightest minds came to understand the mysteries of the universe. The professor's skin had a slight shimmer to it, like oil on water, and her large golden eyes could see in spectrums that most species couldn't even imagine. She had been teaching xenobiology for over 30 cycles now, specializing in the study of dangerous worlds and the creatures that lived on them. Today's lesson was one of her favorites, a topic that never failed to capture her students' attention and send chills down whatever spines they happened to have. As the students settled into their seats, the diversity of life in the galaxy was on full display. Near the front, a group of Krillians clustered together, their insect-like bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. These bug-like beings clicked and chittered each other through their sharp mandibles, their compound eyes reflecting the room like tiny mirrors. They were known throughout the galaxy for their precise analytical minds and their ability to process information faster than most computers. Floating above the middle rows were the Zentans, creatures of pure energy contained within shimmering force fields. They didn't have physical bodies like most species, instead existing as swirling clouds of light and consciousness. When they communicated, it was through pulses of colored light that danced across their translucent forms. They rarely attended physical classes, preferring digital learning environments, so their presence today indicated just how interesting this particular lecture was expected to be. Taking up nearly half the back section were the Gorlakians, massive bear-like creatures whose thick fur ranged from deep brown to silver gray. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, even when sitting down, and the reinforced seats creaked under their weight. Despite their intimidating appearance, they were known to be gentle scholars who valued knowledge above all else. Their deep, rumbling voices could shake the walls when they got excited about a particularly fascinating topic. Scattered throughout the amphitheater were dozens of other species, the tall, graceful Altarians with their swan-like necks, the stocky dwarven miners from the asteroid belt colonies, the crystalline resonants whose bodies chimed softly when they moved, and many others. Each brought their own perspective and understanding to the classroom, making every discussion rich with diverse viewpoints. Professor Velterra activated the holographic display system, her translator device automatically adjusting to broadcast her natural clicks and whistles in the common galactic language. The air above the podium shimmered and formed into a three-dimensional map of a small solar system on the outer rim of the galaxy. One planet glowed an ominous red, marking it as extremely dangerous. Today, my eager students, we examine the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3, she announced, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the massive room. This planet, known in some ancient texts as Earth, represents what we call a class. 12 Deathworld, the most dangerous classification in our system. A collective gasp echoed through the amphitheater. Even the most experienced students had only heard whispers of class. 12 worlds. Most inhabited planets barely reach class 3 on the danger scale. The holographic display zoomed in on the blue and green planet, showing swirling white clouds and vast oceans that looked deceptively peaceful from space. Now, you might wonder what makes a world earn such a terrifying classification, the professor continued, clearly enjoying the suspense she was building. The answer lies not in the environment itself, though Sol 3 does feature crushing gravitational forces, deadly weather patterns, and atmospheric conditions that would kill most of us within minutes. No, the true horror of this world comes from the creatures that call it home. The hologram shifted, and suddenly the peaceful planet view was replaced by something that made several students actually shriek in terror. A massive great white shark materialized in the air, its dead black eyes staring out at the audience, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleaming in its open mouth. The creature was depicted at actual size, nearly 6 meters of pure predatory perfection. Behold the Carcharodon carcharias, more commonly known as the great white shark, Professor Velterra explained, her voice taking on the dramatic tone she reserved for her most frightening examples. This living torpedo of death patrols the oceans of Sol 3, capable of detecting a single drop of blood from kilometers away. Its bite force exceeds 25,000 newtons, enough to crush the reinforced hull plating of most starships. In the back corner of the lecture hall, tucked away where the shadows fell deepest, a figure in a standard gray environmental suit sat quietly taking notes on a small electronic pad. The suit was the type commonly worn by species who needed different atmospheric conditions than the standard classroom environment provided. According to the enrollment records, this was M. Cooper, listed simply as exchange student with no species designation or homeworld indicated. Most of the other students hadn't paid much attention to this newcomer who had joined their class halfway through the semester. Exchange students were common enough at the Institute, usually researchers or scholars from distant worlds who wanted to study specific topics. This one seemed particularly quiet and studious, never speaking up during discussions, but always present and always taking careful notes. As Professor Velterra continued her terrifying presentation, describing how these oceanic monsters could launch themselves completely out of the water to attack prey, the figure in the environmental suit shifted slightly in their seat, almost as if they were uncomfortable with the dramatic descriptions being given. The lecture had been going on for nearly an hour when Professor Velterra finally paused her dramatic presentation about Earth's terrifying creatures. She had just finished describing how saltwater crocodiles were living fossils that had remained unchanged for millions of years, perfect killer machines that could snap a being in half with their massive jaws. The holographic crocodile floating above the podium looked absolutely menacing, its yellow eyes seeming to track the movements of terrified students. "Now then," the professor announced, her forearms folding in a gesture that indicated she was ready for discussion. "Are there any questions about these theoretical Deathworld predators before we move on to our next topic?" Several students shifted nervously in their seats, but most seemed too frightened by what they had just learned to speak up. The Krillians were clicking their mandibles in what appeared to be worried discussion among themselves, while the massive Gorlakians looked genuinely disturbed by the descriptions of creatures that could potentially threaten even their considerable size and strength. That's when something unexpected happened. From the back corner of the lecture hall, where the quiet exchange student had been sitting all semester, a gloved hand slowly rose into the air. The movement was so calm and measured that it seemed almost out of place after the terrifying presentation they had all just witnessed. Professor Velterra blinked her large golden eyes in surprise. In all the weeks since this mysterious student had joined her class, they had never once participated in any discussion or asked a single question. She had begun to wonder if they were even paying attention, though their constant note-taking suggested otherwise. "Yes?" the professor called out, her translator device automatically amplify her voice so it would carry to the back of the room. "You have a question about our theoretical Deathworld fauna?" The figure in the environmental suit stood up slowly, their movement causing several nearby students to turn and look. When they spoke, their voice came through the universal translator system with a calm, measured tone that seemed remarkably composed for someone who had just spent an hour learning about the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. "Actually, Professor, I believe there are several inaccuracies in your presentation that I feel obligated to point out," the student said politely. "While your research is clearly extensive, some of the conclusions about these animals seem to be based on incomplete or misinterpreted data." A ripple of surprise went through the lecture hall. It was extremely rare for students to challenge professors' expertise so directly, especially during a formal lecture. Professor Velterra's skin began to shift color slightly, a sign that she was becoming agitated, and her distinctive crest began to rise from her head in what most species recognized as a warning display. The exchange student seemed completely unaffected by these signs of growing irritation and continued speaking in the same calm, respectful tone. For example, great white sharks very rarely attack intelligent beings. Most encounters between sharks and other species result from mistaken identity. The sharks think they're approaching their normal prey and realize their error before any serious harm occurs. Actual predatory attacks are extremely uncommon. Several students gasped at this contradiction of everything they had just been taught. The professor's crest was now fully extended, and her skin had shifted to a deeper, more aggressive shade of purple. Furthermore, the student continued, apparently oblivious to the professor's growing anger, bears typically go to great lengths to avoid contact with populated areas. They're actually quite shy creatures that prefer to maintain their distance from other intelligent species. Most bear encounters occur when the animals are surprised or when they're protecting their young, not because they're actively hunting. The lecture hall had grown completely silent now. Even the Zenthans had stopped their constant light-pulsing communication, floating perfectly still as they absorbed this unexpected turn of events. And lions, the student added, while certainly capable predators, actually spend approximately 20 hours per day resting or sleeping. They're much more interested in conserving energy than in constant hunting, and they typically only become aggressive when defending territory or competing for resources. Professor Velterra's 4 arms were now trembling slightly with indignation. Her years of academic training and research were being casually dismissed by a mere exchange student who had barely spoken a word all semester. The disrespect was almost unbearable. "And how exactly?" she demanded, her voice rising to a level that made the translator speakers crackle slightly. "Would a student, any student, possess more accurate data about theoretical Deathworld fauna than a tenured xenobiologist with over 30 years of research experience? These creatures exist only in intercepted transmissions and academic speculation. No living being has ever encountered them and survived to provide first-hand accounts." The exchange student paused for a moment, and even from across the large lecture hall, everyone could see them reach up toward their helmet. The movement was slow and deliberate, as if they were making an important decision. "Well, Professor," they said quietly, their hands working at the seals of their environmental suit, "that's not entirely accurate." The helmet came off with the softest of equalizing air pressure, and suddenly the entire lecture hall erupted in gasps, screams, and various alien expressions of shock and terror. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about the universe. The being standing before them had unmistakably mammalian features, smooth skin instead of scales or chitin, hair growing from the top of their head, and most disturbing of all, 2 forward-facing eyes positioned exactly where a predator's eyes should be. Their teeth, visible when they spoke, were clearly designed for eating both plant and animal matter, marking them as an omnivore, another classic predator characteristic. "Because I'm from there, Professor," the being said with what appeared to be a slight smile, an expression that revealed even more of those unervingly flat teeth. "Dr. Mitchell Cooper, University of Cambridge, Earth." The words hit the lecture hall like a physical blow. Students who had been sitting suddenly found themselves on their feet, many backing away from the impossible sight before them. Others simply stared in complete shock at what their textbooks had always claimed was either extinct or entirely mythical. A human being, an actual living survivor of the legendary Deathworld Soul 3, had been sitting among them all semester, quietly taking notes while they discussed theoretical monsters from his home planet. Professor Velterra's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her translator struggling to process the stunned clicks and whistles she was making. You're really from Soul 3? You're actually from the Deathworld." Dr. Cooper's smile grew a little wider, and several students flinched at the sight. "Born and raised in Yorkshire, Professor. Lovely countryside, really. Rolling green hills, plenty of sheep, and yes, the occasional bear, though they're not nearly as aggressive as your research suggests." Professor Velterra stood frozen for several long moments, her 4 arms trembling slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. A real human being, a living, breathing survivor from the most dangerous world in known space, was standing in her classroom, politely correcting her lifetime of research. Her voice came out as a barely audible whisper when she finally managed to speak. Would you perhaps be willing to share some of your first-hand knowledge with the class?" she stammered, gesturing weakly toward the podium. "I think we could all benefit from hearing about Seoul. 3 from someone who actually lives there." Dr. Cooper nodded graciously and made his way down the steps of the amphitheater. As he walked, students scrambled to get out his path, some diving behind their seats, while others pressed themselves against the walls. The Krillians were making rapid clicking sounds that their translators registered as expressions of extreme panic, while several of the Gorlakians, despite being 3 times the size, were actually whimpering with fear. When he reached the podium, Dr. Cooper looked out at the terrified faces staring back at him, and his expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Please, don't be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt anyone. Humans are actually quite peaceful by nature. He pulled out a small electronic device that looked similar to the datapads most students use for taking notes. But this one was clearly of human design, sleeker and more advanced than anything most of the class had seen before. With practiced ease, he connected it to the lecture hall's holographic display system. "The truth about life on Earth," Dr. Cooper began, "is quite different from what your textbooks suggest. Yes, our world is dangerous. And yes, we share it with some of the galaxy's most powerful predators. But we don't survive by fighting them or hiding from them. We've learned something that apparently no other species has mastered. We've learned to work together." The holographic display came to life, showing a scene that made several students gasp in disbelief. A group of humans were swimming in clear blue water alongside massive gray creatures with bottle-shaped noses and intelligent eyes. These were clearly dolphins, one of Earth's ocean predators. But instead of attacking humans, they seemed to be playing with them, diving and spinning in elaborate underwater dances. "These are dolphins," Dr. Cooper explained, his voice filled with obvious affection. "They're some of the most intelligent creatures on our planet, and they've been our partners for thousands of years. They help our fishermen locate schools of fish, they rescue drowning humans, and they even work with our military forces to detect underwater threats." The scene changed to show something even more impossible. A young human child, barely tall enough to reach an adult's waist, playing in a grassy field with a massive four-legged creature covered in thick fur. The creature was clearly large enough and strong enough to harm the child, but instead it was gently nudging a ball back and forth, its tail wagging enthusiastically. "This is what we call a dog," Dr. Cooper continued, and several students actually laughed despite their fear, not because anything was funny, but because the situation had become so surreal that laughter seemed like the only appropriate response. Thousands of years ago, these were wolves, pack hunters that could theoretically pose a threat to humans. But instead of fighting them, we offered them food and shelter in exchange for companionship and protection. The display shifted again, showing humans mounted on the backs of enormous four-legged creatures, galloping across vast open plains. The sight was so alien to most of the students that they couldn't even comprehend what they were seeing. The idea of one species voluntarily carrying another across such distances was completely foreign to their understanding of how different life forms interacted. "Horses," Dr. Cooper explained. "We convinced these massive herbivores to carry us wherever we needed to go. They're faster and stronger than humans, but they chose to work with us because we provided them with food, medical care, and protection from other predators." But the most shocking video came next. The holographic display showed a human researcher in what appeared to be a metal cage, submerged in dark ocean water. Swimming just outside the cage were several great white sharks, the same creatures that Professor Velterra had described as unstoppable killing machines. The sharks moved slowly around the cage, their black eyes studying the human inside, but making no aggressive moves whatsoever. "My colleague Dr. Thompson took this footage last month," Dr. Cooper said casually. "She's been studying great white behavior for over 10 years now. These particular sharks have learned to recognize her equipment and actually seem curious about her research. They've never shown any aggressive behavior toward her." A Zenthan student pulsed a bright yellow light, which the translator interpreted as a question. "But how is this possible? These creatures should view humans as prey, should they not?" Dr. Cooper smiled, and this time the students didn't flinch quite as much at the sight of his teeth. "That's the key difference between humans and most other species in the galaxy. We don't see other creatures as enemies to be defeated or obstacles to be overcome. We see them as potential partners, allies, or at worst, neighbors who need to be understood and respected." He touched his datapad again, bringing up a new series of images that showed the incredible diversity of human-animal relationships. There were humans working alongside massive elephants to move heavy logs, tiny birds perched on human shoulders helping to guide them through dense forests, and even images of humans carefully tending to injured predators, nursing them back to health before releasing them back into the wild. "We've domesticated hundreds of different species," Dr. Cooper explained. "Some for food, some for labor, some for companionship, and some simply because we find them beautiful or interesting. We've learned that cooperation almost always produces better results than conflict. The lecture hall had grown completely silent as the students absorbed this revolutionary concept. The idea that a species could not only survive on a death world, but actually thrive by working with its dangerous inhabitants was completely contrary to everything they'd been taught about survival and evolution. But Dr. Cooper wasn't finished yet. The images on the display changed once more, this time showing scenes that made the students realize they had been thinking about the situation all wrong from the very beginning. Dr. Cooper continued his presentation, completely unaware of the growing sense of unease that was spreading to the lecture hall like a cold wave. What he said next would fundamentally change how every student in that room viewed the concept of dangerous predators forever. Of course, working with Earth's wildlife is just one aspect of human life, he said with a casual tone of someone discussing the weather. We also enjoy quite a variety of recreational activities that help us stay physically and mentally sharp. The holographic display shifted to show a scene that made several students actually cry out in horror. A lone human figure was clinging to the face of a massive vertical rock wall, hundreds of meters above the ground below. There were no safety ropes, no protective equipment, no backup plans visible anywhere. The human was supported by nothing more than their own fingers and toes, finding tiny cracks and ledges in the stone. This is called free climbing. Dr. Cooper explained matter-of-factly, it's quite popular among humans who enjoy testing their physical limits. The goal is to reach the top using only your natural abilities and mental focus. It's an excellent way to build confidence and problem-solving skills. A Gorlakian student made a deep rumbling sound that the translator interpreted as distress confusion. But if you fall, you die instantly. Why would any sane being risk their life for recreation? Dr. Cooper seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Well, yes, there is some risk involved, but that's what makes it interesting. Besides, humans have been climbing mountains and cliffs for thousands of years. Our ancestors needed these skills to hunt, explore new territories, and escape from dangerous situations. Now we do it because it's fun and keeps us in good physical condition. The display changed again, this time showing a human figure plummeting to the sky, falling toward the earth at terrifying speed. Just when it seemed certain that they would crash to their death, a large fabric canopy suddenly deployed above them, slowing their descent to a gentle drift toward the ground. Skydiving is another popular activity. Dr. Cooper continued cheerfully. Humans jump out of perfectly functional aircraft just for the thrill of free falling through the atmosphere. Some of our more adventurous individuals have jumped from heights exceeding 30,000 meters. The Zenthans were pulsing rapid sequences of panicked orange and red lights, their translators struggling to keep up with their frantic communications. One of them managed to form a coherent message. This behavior suggests severe psychological instability. Do humans suffer from species-wide mental illness? Dr. Cooper actually laughed at the suggestion, a sound that made several students flinch because they weren't sure if it indicated amusement or aggression. Not at all. These activities help humans develop courage, quick thinking, and physical conditioning. They're also quite enjoyable once you get used to them. The holographic display now showed underwater scenes that defied all logic and reason. Humans were diving to depths where the water pressure should crush their bodies instantly, exploring underwater caves, and swimming alongside creatures that could swallow them whole. Some wore breathing equipment, but others seemed to be holding their breath for impossible amounts of time. Deep-sea exploration is another field where humans excel, Dr. Cooper mentioned casually. Some of our free divers can hold their breath for over 20 minutes and dive to depths exceeding 200 meters using nothing but their natural lung capacity. Professor Velterra's skin had turned a pale, sickly shade of green as she began to understand the true implications of what she was hearing. Dr. Cooper, she said slowly, are you telling us that humans routinely engage in activities that would kill most intelligent species, and they do this voluntarily for entertainment? Oh, absolutely, Dr. Cooper replied with enthusiasm. Just last month, my colleague Dr. Rebecca Thompson was conducting behavioral research on great white sharks off the coast of Australia. She spent 3 days swimming in open water with them. No protective cage, no weapons, just her observation equipment and underwater camera. The sharks were remarkably docile. Actually, they seemed more curious about her than anything else. The lecture hall erupted in shocked gasps and horrified clicking sounds. The idea that someone would voluntarily enter the territory of apex predators for research purposes was disturbing enough. But to do it without any protection whatsoever seemed like absolute madness. Dr. Cooper seemed oblivious to their horror, and continued speaking in the same conversational tone. Humans are also quite good at endurance activities. Our marathon runners can cover over 40 kilometers at a steady pace, and our ultramarathon athletes regularly run for 24 hours straight or more. Some of our persistence hunters can track prey for days without stopping, running continuously until the animal collapses from exhaustion. A Krillian student in the front row made rapid clicking sounds that translated as nervous questions. But surely humans must have limitations? There must be environments where even humans cannot survive? Dr. Cooper considered this seriously. Well, we do have our challenges, of course. But humans have successfully established permanent settlements in Arctic conditions where temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees, in desert regions where daytime temperatures exceed 50 degrees, at altitudes where most species would die from oxygen deprivation, and even in underground cave systems where no natural light penetrates. The display now showed images of human cities built in the most hostile environments imaginable, ice-covered research stations in polar regions, sprawling settlements in scorching deserts, mountain communities perched on peaks that scrape the sky, and even underwater habitats resting on ocean floors. We've learned to adapt our technology and behavior to suit virtually any environment our planet can offer, Dr. Cooper explained. And now we're working on expanding beyond Earth entirely. Human colonies are already being established on other worlds, and our terraforming projects are turning hostile planets into suitable habitats for human life. Professor Velterra felt a cold realization settling over her like a heavy blanket. Everything she had spent her career studying, every assumption about Deathworld survival and apex predators had been completely backwards. The creatures they've been calling monsters, the sharks, the bears, the lions, these weren't the true predators of Earth at all. They were the prey. The native fauna of this so-called Deathworld hadn't created an environment too hostile for intelligent life to survive. They had simply learned to coexist peacefully with something far more adaptable, far more persistent, and far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever encountered before. A young Krillian student raised her front leg tentatively, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled fear. Dr. Cooper, if humans are truly the apex species on your world, then what exactly does that make all the other creatures we've been studying? The sharks and bears and lions? Dr. Cooper's smile was warm and genuine, but somehow that made it even more terrifying to the assembled students. Our neighbors, he said simply. The massive lecture hall fell into an eerie quiet as Dr. Cooper finished his presentation and stepped back from the holographic display controls. The silence wasn't the comfortable kind that followed a normal academic lecture. This was a heavy, oppressive silence of minds struggling to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. Students sat frozen in their seats, some staring blankly at the now empty holographic display space, others looking directly at Dr. Cooper, as if trying to convince themselves that what they had just witnessed was real. The Krillians had stopped their constant chittering entirely, their compound eyes reflecting the lecture hall lights like tiny mirrors as they processed the implications of what they had learned. Even the massive Gorlakians seemed diminished somehow, their usual confident postures replaced by something that looked suspiciously like wariness. Dr. Cooper looked out at the sea of shocked faces and seemed to realize for the first time just how profoundly his casual revelations had affected his audience. His expression softened with what appeared to be genuine concern for their well-being. "I want to assure all of you," he said gently, his voice carrying easily through the amplification system, "that humans have come to the galactic community with nothing but peaceful intentions. We're here to learn, to share knowledge, and to build positive relationships with all the species we encounter. We have no interest in conquest or domination. We've learned over thousands of years that cooperation always produces better results than conflict." A Zenda near the middle of the amphitheater pulsed a dim, uncertain blue light that the translator interpreted as a hesitant question. "But if your species is capable of such adaptability, and if you view challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles to be avoided, how can we be certain that you won't decide the galaxy itself presents an interesting challenge to overcome?" Dr. Cooper considered this question seriously before responding. That's a fair concern, and I understand why our capabilities might seem threatening from your perspective. But you have to understand that humans measure success differently than you might expect. We don't see conquest as an achievement. We see mutual prosperity as the ultimate goal. A galaxy where all species thrive and contribute their unique strengths is far more valuable to us than one where humans dominate through force. Professor Velterra, who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, finally found her voice again. She looked at Dr. Cooper with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with something that might have been fear. "Dr. Cooper," she said slowly, her four arms gesturing in patterns that indicated deep confusion, "I need to ask you something that I think many of us are wondering about. Your presentation has shown us that every fundamental assumption we've made about Deathworld survival has been incorrect. Our entire academic model was based on the idea that hostile environments create specialized predators, creatures perfectly adapted to their specific ecological niche." She paused, her golden eyes reflecting the overhead lighting as she struggled to formulate her next words. "But humans appear to be something entirely different. You're not specialists at all, are you? You're generalists who can adapt to virtually any situation, any environment, any challenge. That's unprecedented in all our studies of galactic biology." Dr. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right, Professor. Humans are indeed generalist survivors rather than specialized predators. Earth didn't create us to fill one specific ecological role. It forced us to become adaptable enough to fill whatever role was necessary for survival. When our environment changed, we changed with it. When we encountered new challenges, we developed new solutions. When we met other species, we learned to work with them rather than simply competing against them." The implications of this statement rippled through the lecture hall like a physical wave. Students began whispering to each other in dozens of different languages, their translators creating a low buzz of overlapping conversations as they tried to process what this meant for their understanding of evolution, survival, and the very nature of intelligence itself. Professor Velterra stood up from her position behind the instructor's desk, her skin shifting to colors that indicated she was making an important decision. "Dr. Cooper," she said formally, "would you be willing to work with our department to completely revise our xenobiology curriculum? It's clear that our current understanding of Deathworld dynamics is not just incomplete, it's fundamentally wrong. We need to start over from the beginning." Dr. Cooper's face lit up with obvious enthusiasm. "I would be absolutely delighted to help with that project, Professor. In fact, I should mention that I'm not the only human researcher who will be joining the academic community here. My colleagues Dr. Nathan Rodriguez and Dr. Catherine Walsh will be arriving next semester with comprehensive databases covering Earth's ecological systems, human evolutionary history, and detailed studies of human-animal cooperation patterns." He pulled out his advanced datapad and began scrolling through what appeared to be extensive files. "We've also prepared comparative studies showing how human adaptation strategies might apply to other planetary environments, theoretical models for human-alien cooperation frameworks, and preliminary research on how human problem-solving approaches might benefit other species facing environmental challenges." The professor accepted this offer, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely sure whether this represented an incredible academic opportunity or the beginning of something that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Over the following days and weeks, word of Dr. Cooper's lecture spread throughout the Galactic Academic Institute like wildfire, and from there to universities and research centers across known space. The revelation that humans, real, living humans, had joined the galactic community sent shockwaves through every field of study from xenobiology to military strategy. Academic journals rushed to publish papers re-examining everything they thought they knew about Deathworld classification systems. Military analysts began developing new models for assessing potential threats that took human adaptability into account. Diplomatic corps across the galaxy started preparing protocols for interacting with species that appeared to view challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles to be avoided. Earth was officially reclassified in galactic databases from theoretical class, 12 Deathworld, to human homeworld, approached with caution and respect. The change was subtle but significant. It acknowledged that this wasn't a planet of monsters to be studied from a safe distance, but the home of a new galactic civilization that demanded to be taken seriously. The question that kept appearing in academic papers, military briefings, and diplomatic reports across the galaxy was no longer whether humans were dangerous.